The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading. Well, for many areas over the weekend, we saw some welcome rainfall in parts of the Midwest. Will that pattern continue? What are we looking at in the week ahead? Let's talk about what we are seeing. Joining us now for our weekly weather update, Eric Snodgrass with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Eric, good to talk with you, and hope you had a good weekend. I know part of your weekend and part of mine too was kind of hampered by rain, which I think for both of us and many folks, it was much needed to get a little bit of rainfall here over the weekend, Eric.
Yeah, we did a kind of a rapid cleanup of the yard. We have 30 trees on a half acre. We live in the middle of a forest. So we did this rapid cleanup on Saturday morning ahead of the rain and filled the entire trailer. And I remember just looking at everything just covered in dust from us just trying to get everything cleaned up. So I was so ready for this rainfall to come through. And yeah, parts of southern Illinois picked up 4 inches of rain. It came out of Missouri. We filled in some holes in Missouri, Illinois, Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana. But there's one spot that I needed to see more rain get into, and that was northwestern Ohio. Now, if you go back since August 1st, when the Bermuda High left, I mean, that's really been the culprit for the dryness. Compared to historical averages, there's one spot, the climate district in northwestern Ohio, that's up by Michigan and northeastern Indiana, that is the driest it has ever been from August 1st even until today. They only got 0.4 of an inch of rain. Now, it was rain, but they needed so much more. So this didn't fill in everything. And, as the rain came through, the really dry soils took in most of it. It was a nice steady rain for a lot of us. Now, there was severe weather to the south, which, by the way, this weekend severe storms put us now over 1,500 reports of tornadoes this year, which is above average. But for a lot of folks, it was a slower rainfall event. I'm thinking about Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan as an example. And that brought up soil moisture, but none of this has gotten into the major river systems yet. So the Mississippi this morning is 9 feet below low stage. We need to see if some of this water can percolate into that system as we go forward. But it just makes a point that it's going to take a whole lot more than this to fully break the drought. And Jesse, to be honest with you, when you look at the grand scheme of things, like I'm looking at my own local accumulation of rainfall, it's just a little blip at the end. It wasn't like it corrected longer standing problems, but it proved to me that the atmosphere can return some Gulf moisture and make some rain. So it was nice, and it cooled off afterwards as well.
Well, let's think about this pattern moving forward this week through the end of the month. I mean, how are things setting up? What's the jet stream looking like? Any activity in the Pacific that we need to keep an eye on influencing things here in the U.S.? I mean, just as you take the 1,000-foot view, Eric, what stands out to you right now?
Yeah, when you look across the Pacific, there are actually in the Indian Ocean and Pacific 5 different tropical systems we're watching. And that's a very curious thing because it could influence some of our subseasonal predictors. Like we often talk about the MJO. I'm not going to rely on the MJO right now because those tropical systems are likely influencing it. So what am I looking at? Well, about, 8-10 days ago, we saw this first in a long time extended jet leaving Siberia. And that's what's got the North Pacific stacked up with more systems. So we're going to be hammering the Pacific Northwest with low pressure systems, and they're going to come across the country. So we've got one early this week that's going to go through the Great Lakes into the Northeast. We have one coming later this week that's going to hit parts of the Southern Plains, not all of them though, like the eastern sides of Kansas and Oklahoma and Texas, the western sides of Kentucky, Arkansas, Missouri, and Louisiana. So you see that little area that's right in there that's going to get some more rain. They need it too. But then we have another, just loaded pattern coming into the Pacific Northwest. There's going to be some mountain snows out there. In fact, I'm heading out to Salt Lake City this week and also down to Central California. And I'm looking forward to going over the mountains to see kind of what the snowpack looks like there early in the season. But even into week 2, we still have a bit more activity, but it's mainly confined to like the Northwest into the Midwest. So there's a hole south, and that hole is covering most of Texas as an example. It's also quite dry in the Southeast. And Jesse, it's very early to say this, but let me paint a picture for you that I want you to think about. Let's just imagine that we get typical La Nina weather behavior all the way through the rest of winter leading into spring. The driest parts under typical, and what is typical, but because the correlations are not that high, but if it's typical, the Sun Belt and Cotton Belt are drier. We're already dry in parts of the Cotton Belt and some of the Sun Belt. I know Arizona just got a bunch of rain and severe weather 10 days ago, but that little pocket there, let's imagine it survives all the way until April. And then if April rains don't come through and April severe weather doesn't come through and revive the delta in either side of it, all the way to Texas, all the way to South Carolina. If that lingers, that could be a serious threat signal to the Mid-South Midwest dryness next summer. Now, Jesse, I'm like, we're just talking about something that's 7 to 8 months away.
Yeah.
But if you look at the new long-range model data, which have all bitten into this La Nina peaking right before Christmas or around Christmas, and possibly packing a little bit of a punch, if we do not fill in that gap across the South, it is a major red flag going forward. And so we've been looking like maybe a hurricane can come through and do it. Well, we have Invest 98L that's going to get into the Caribbean. That's what we call it, Invest 98L. That's the National Weather Service for you, okay? So it gets into the Caribbean. It's very warm in the Caribbean, but most models don't take it into the Gulf, which means it's going to probably go over the island of Hispaniola or die in the Caribbean and never get into the South. And so I'm looking at this going, if we do not get a secondary component to the jet stream, I told you about the North Pacific. If we don't get the South, or the Central, the Southern Pacific, still on the northern side of the equator, but that southern branch just hammering into the Southwest, it's kind of hard to tell you that there's going to be just a really good wet winter in that area, which is what they need to break the drought, which, by the way, now this was released before the weekend rain, but it ticked up to now 74% coverage across the country when you include the D0 to D4 categories. So, Jesse, all that's kind of weighing on my mind, saying what type of fall and winter are we going to have to get us into the next growing season? And that's kind of where it sits.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting to see how this all shapes up over the next several weeks ahead. That'll be a pretty key indicator, I can imagine. What about around the rest of the world? Anything you're watching, say, the Black Sea region, Russia, maybe down into South America, et cetera, et cetera? You hit on a few points that you're watching, that impact our jet stream, but anything else out there around the world that we need to keep an eye on?
For the last 45 days or so, much of the eastern side of Ukraine and most of Russia, where we grow a lot of winter wheat, was very, very dry. I kind of just ignored it a little bit, but it kind of accumulated. And now I'm looking at there's actually pretty sizable deficits. I've heard that's had an impact on winter wheat planting, but they're expected to get some precipitation, which should be better for, the germination of that crop. You go over to parts of India, their monsoon was supposed to end in September. They're still soaked in places. So a lot of flooding going on in India. North of the Yangtze River, a lot of flooding, but not fully into like the North China Plain or the Manchurian Plain, which is where they compete with the US on corn and soybeans. Elsewhere, Indonesia, much of that island archipelago is wet. We've had some dryness in parts of the eastern side of Australia. So think Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. It's spring there. They're needing some moisture to finish off their winter crop, So there's been some worry about that, but there's some moisture trying to get into South Australia. But the big question folks are going to have is, what about Brazil? We did get an update last week on Friday about Brazil's planting progress, specifically Mato Grosso. They were fastest they've ever been first couple of weeks, and then it backed way off closer to average. The last week matched the 5-year historical trend. They're above average, but it matched the slope of the line. And we're looking at an overall drier than average forecast for the next 2 weeks in Brazil's central growing areas. But you need to know that drier doesn't mean dry, right? I mean, if they're drier by 50 millimeters of rainfall, that's 2 inches. They might still get an inch. And therefore, we need to understand that the measurement of total precipitation sometimes is a better indicator than anomalies. You know what I'm saying? Because, if it's midsummer there, 4 inches of rain a week is that's what we get, right? Mm-hmm. But they can still do well on 2 inches of rain a week or 1, which if you were in Iowa and you said, I'm only going to give you half your summer rainfall, we'd destroy a crop. But in Brazil, it's especially in northern Brazil, it's a tropical climate setup. I think the big concern we may have going forward is that southern Brazil and Argentina may have issues with drought come summer, just given the typical La Nina behavior. But again, that's a bit speculative. I'm giving a lot of credit to La Nina to make that happen. But that's my trip around the world.
Well, anything else you have for us here this week, Eric, before we close it out?
Yeah, just be aware of the winds coming across the Central Plains. We've got red flag warnings in Colorado, very strong winds through the Northern Plains today. I'm talking like 40, 50, 60-mile-an-hour gusts. And what I'm concerned about, Jesse, is if they get into the more of the Midwest, we've got a lot of fields that didn't get harvested before this rain. And I could walk up to some of those corn stalks and just push them over like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm concerned about what that might mean going forward, but we'll keep you up to date on agweather.com and just watch the weather forecast maps to see if the winds are going to be a problem in your area.
Eric Snodgrass, Nutrien Ag Solutions. Always good to talk with you, sir. Thanks for joining us again on the weekly weather update.
Yeah, you bet.
Make sure to subscribe to the Market Talk YouTube channel. You can watch our latest interviews with top market analysts in the country, find bonus content, and much more. It's easy. Just go to youtube.com/@MarketTalkAg and hit the subscribe button. Or you can search for Market Talk Ag on YouTube.